Hello out there to all my friends at Internet Land. My name is Chicko Dee, and welcome to the fourth season of Chicko's Video Dustbin Show. Today's episode is 2001's Children of the Living Dead, a sequel to Night of the Living Dead's 30th anniversary release. This film was directed by Tor Ramsey and written by Karen Lee Wolf. The movie opens up with the title screen and the credits over a bonfire, presumably for the re-dead zombies. After the credits, we see a local posse whacking zombies in a field. Look everyone, it's an old-fashioned zombie shootout that really brings the community together. It's a BYOG and having fun dispatching your undead family and friends. I bet these humans would love to make some money off of this if they could. Here's the film's fat oaf of a sheriff, being useless as usual. And making a pointless cameo appearance is the sex machine himself, Blades, Osiris Amanpour. He just shows up long enough to kill a dozen zombies and force Randolph, the fat cop, to do his job. The dapper duo check out the old Hayes place, which is still unfortunately occupied by one of the original tenants. Blaze enters the old house while Randolph whines like an unfunny Mantan Moorland. Randolph learns that Sex Machine was right about the zombies not eating children but using them as bait to lure the local adults. The two rescue the kids. Blades, while clearing out the barn, bumps into the king of the zombies, Abbott Hayes, who mortally wounds him with the cord of blood technique. Randolph has to put Sex Machine out of his misery before he can turn into one of the undead. Meanwhile, outside, all of the freshly revived corpses that have been re-killed are disposed of in a large bonfire. Man, how time flies. 14 years later, and Sheriff Randolph is still a useless load, hanging out with the boys and a hash slinger named Lori. While the local cool kids are off in a microbus to check out a rock concert in the big city. Like a bunch of dumbasses, the kids decided to mess around the old Abbott Hayes estate looking for Abbott Hayes instead of driving straight to the concert. Naturally, Abbott Hayes shows up as the dumb kids were leaving and crashes their traveling party. The dead kids are quickly buried, leaving the hash slinger alone without her crew. Later that night, a pair of grave pirates go snooping around the cemetery looking for buried treasure. The old man screams, "Abbott Hayes!" and runs off while the young, dumb thief gets mauled by the king of the zombies. Abbott Hayes then bites the dead blonde girl, even though she's already an embalmed corpse, to presumably make her part of his new batch of followers. The next morning, the cemetery man freaks out over the mess that the new batch of zombies made the night before while Abbott Hayes watches behind the tree to survey his work. The cemetery man calls the sheriff and whines at him about his two lazy buffoons that work for him and how they were too lazy to bury the coffins and says that they never clocked in this morning. I guess they no-call no-showed. After the sheriff leaves, the cemetery man decides to rebury the empty caskets before he's interrupted by Abbott Hayes, who mauls him and tosses his body into one of the coffins. Time marches on. The new owner of the Hayes estate drops by to check out his big purchase, much to the chagrin of Abbott Hayes. The sheriff, who was going to roust the young dude until he found out his name is Matthew Michaels and his parents just bought the Hayes dump, he immediately begins to kiss his ass. Abbott Hayes, just like the rest of the audience, despised the carpetbagger and the very useless sheriff. We also learn that the Michaels family is going to tear down the Hayes estate and build a used car lot on top of it. In no time flat do the construction crews come in and renovate the Hayes estate. We're introduced to the head of the Matthews family, Joseph, a sleazy guy who hired an even sleazier man named Greg Peters, who paid off the sheriff. The screenwriter and producer of the film, Karen Lee Wolf, makes a cameo appearance as a matriarch of the family, Marilyn, who we later found out through Matthew that she's her stepmother. Michael has to sleep in a local flop house while awaiting orders from his dad. This spoiled trust fund baby is used to 5-star hotels, not $20 a night flea bag motels. The hash slinger happens to drop by the flea bag motel and meets his manager, the other grave robber, Dusty, who sleazily ogles the girl. Trust fund Matt and hash slinger Laurie bump into each other and become fast friends. Matt finally meets his new mentor, scumbag Greg, who's here to teach the kid the ropes on how to be a sleazeball just like his daddy. The first thing he does is order the construction crew to dig a large pit and dump all the coffins in it instead of moving them to another cemetery in order to save a few bucks. Later that night, Abbott Hayes goes on a moonlight stroll and notices that most of the graves have been dug up, causing him to breathe even heavier than usual. The next morning at the crack of dawn, Hayes gathers his army of the undead after mutilating a dog, while Matthew has an unfunny conversation with the sleazy motel manager and part-time grave robber about finding a place to eat, because I wouldn't trust their free continental breakfast either. Greg arrives at the worksite to find a mafia-like message that the zombies have left. Hayes must have been a capo or something in the mob, I guess. Old trust fund Matt finds a hashlinger at her job, and he makes his move on her, making blathering small talk that seems to be looped in post-production. They talk about the legend of Abbott Hayes, which sounds similar to Ed Gein. Later that night, Dusty, the manager at the local motel hotel Holiday Inn, is living the life until he gets a mysterious call. The phone call was made by Abbott Hayes, who's out to get Dusty, the motel manager, along with his growing army of zombies that also somehow managed to cut his stove gas line, which drives him out from his jerk pit, or Tug Castle, whatever you prefer. After getting some fresh air, Dusty is immediately attacked by Abbott Hayes and his goon squad. The poor zombies probably got food poisoning after eating his nasty ass. Dawn, the following day, the clumsy construction workers discover a series of empty, bloody coffins and are perplexed and dumbfounded by their discovery. Hatchet man Greg tells them to quit whining about the empty, blood-stained coffins and get back to work desecrating the cemetery. Matt finds about Greg's scheme to dump all the corpses into a giant pit instead of relocating the bodies to save a few dollars, and he's going to tell his dad on him. But Greg tells him that it was his father who came up with the idea. Later that night, Trust Fund Matt and Hashlinger Lori go on their first date to the local cemetery to visit the mass grave along with the Hayes estate. The next day, Joe Michaels and Greg talk about plans for the new auto mall being built on top of the cemetery. Greg tells them that everything is on track. Moments later, the construction crew discover the body of the cemetery man inside of one of the relocated coffins. One crew member who watched a lot of Quincy deduces that the dead man was buried alive. Bored of being in his office, Papa Joe decides to leave the safety of his dealership and decides to slum it up with the boys at the Hayes estate. Hours later, Joe and his foreman and lackey are greeted by members of Abbott's crew. Despite verbally threatening them, more of the goons appear. Abbott Hayes himself decides to take out Papa Joe, while his foreman escapes. The zombies proceed to dine on the old man. The next morning, Grave arrives at the worksite and finds Papa Joe's car, but no Papa Joe. He begins to question the workers, who just shrug their shoulders when asking about his whereabouts. Back at the motel, where they proudly advertise HBO TV, but sadly no porn, Brad the foreman, who was scratched and hickeyed by a zombie, is acting like a strung-out junkie, hiding out in his room, chain-smoking cigs and ignoring phone calls from Greg. Check out the trust fund kid and the hashling are getting ready for their second date, while a few rooms away, Brad awaits his fate. Matt hears some girlish screaming and takes a break from his grooming to discover Brad has become zombie food. Trust fund Matt is chased by a pack of zombies before taking off in his car and fleeing. Lucky it wasn't one from his father's dealership because of his 20-minute or 20-mile guarantee that he proudly offers his customers. After running over a couple of them, he drives to the diner where the Hashlinger practically lives while being followed by an army of zombies. While inside, Lori tells him the story about how she knows all of the zombies because they're her friends who died in a freak accident a year ago caused by Abbott Hayes. The Hashlinger tells Maddie to prepare for the worst and make it look like they're open so the fat pig sheriff would think that they are open and he could cop a free meal and rescue them. Well, sure enough, here comes the sheriff. He manages to get inside before Abbott Hayes could grab him. Abbott Hayes screams in anger when he reads the sign on the door that says, "No Irish, no blacks, no zombies." After nearly getting killed by Abbott Hayes, the sheriff, after running inside, whines about being trapped in there and is unable to call for help. Matt uses his cell phone to call Greg of all people despite having a low battery, but the sheriff commandeers the phone and chats it up with the shyster. Greg has been deputized by the sheriff as a zombie killer and was ordered to form a posse to rescue the trio from the diner. The sheriff explains to Matthew about the zombie outbreaks of 1968 and 1986. I guess they skipped the one of 1978 because that one destroyed the civilization in another cinematic timeline. He also talks about the outbreak of 1986 and tries to make himself out to be a hero, but the hash slinger was there and she remembered things differently. He talks about the zombie king, Abbott Hayes, and how his sick crimes made Sex Machine quit the force, but he came back as a zombie killer. But Lori said Hayes killed him because the sheriff was too much of a coward to help Blades destroy Hayes. Yay! Here comes the cavalry! Abbott Hayes orders the zombies to counterattack the posse by destroying their headlights. Inside the diner, the sheriff gives the posse members a crash course on how to kill zombies 101. It's clobbering time, folks! Abbott Hayes watches in the shadows as the zombie army is crushed by the posse. Matt tells Lori to hide in the basement of the diner while he joins his employees in battle. Minutes later, he gets his first kill, which happens to be Lori's sister. One of the posse members and construction crew, Mr. Dynamite, who tried to blow up Abbott Hayes earlier in the melee, starts to toss another stick from the safety of his car, but he manages to blow himself up. The basement turns out to be a death trap, as Lori gets mauled by several zombies but manages to escape before being saved by the sheriff, who gets bitten in return for his good deed. He orders Lori to put him out of his misery, which she does. The next day, Greg turns out to be the hero, and the lovebirds reunite inside the diner. The mayor drives up and wonders how he's going to clean up this mess from the third zombie outbreak. Abbott Hayes manages to escape and threatens the audience with a sequel. After the credits roll, a posse member looking for zombies kills two of them and rummages through their pockets. The end. Children of the Living Dead, no doubt, is a very bad movie, but entertaining in a car crash sort of way. It's obvious that the film was tinkered with heavily in post-production due to a lot of looping of the actors' voices and weird editing. If you want to know more about Children of the Living Dead, then watch The Drama Behind the Drama, hosted by Alvicado. He'll try to explain how this film ties in with Night of the Living Dead, along with all the backstage shenanigans that occurred during the making of this film. Time to see what the humans are watching again. I hope you enjoyed this show. Bye!